Okay, so first things first. I don't know if you've noticed, but Congressman Lewis isn't here. And so before he gets on and he hears the first sound from you being, "Aw," let's get that out of your system to begin with. Congressman Lewis is not here. The reason he's not here, if you're paying any attention at all to what's going on in our world, is he has a vote tonight. He has a vote tonight of whether or not to send the tax bill that passed the Senate late Friday night or early Saturday morning into conference. That is why he's not here. He has graciously agreed to join us by Skype, and so he's still going to be here interacting with us. He'll join us tonight as well. So we're going to, I don't know where he is, but we'll get there. And so I want you guys to be patient. Look. There he is. Hello, Congressman. Can you hear me?
Hello.
We can't see you very well yet, but we can. Say again, sir. While we're reconnecting, I'm going to introduce you to the two folks you'll be hearing from today, and then I'm going to sit down and we'll get this together. You're going to have to be patient and gracious with us as we do it, but I want to make sure you know who you're talking to, because getting a chance to interact with these two men, is not something that you're going to have very often. So first, let me introduce you to Fred D. Gray. Mr. Gray is a Montgomery native and a nationally recognized civil rights attorney, a celebrated author, lecturer, and former legislator. He was elected to the Alabama legislature, one of the first African Americans elected after Reconstruction. He earned his law degree in 1954. He was born in 1930, so that's 24 when he earned his law degree. Within a year, he was representing Rosa Parks after she refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus. And so Mr. Gray, by the time he's 25, 26, he's representing Ms. Parks in major litigation before Alabama courts. Before he's 30, he's before the Supreme Court 4 more times. Say it again. That was Leslie Garcia right there. There you go. Very nice. He went on to serve as Martin Luther King's attorney in all the litigation in Alabama, and went on from there in landmark civil rights cases that desegregated Alabama schools, that desegregated Alabama colleges, that desegregated transportation across Alabama. He represented the Freedom Riders as they came through Alabama. He represented the marchers in order to protect them on their march between Selma and Montgomery. And he represented the victims of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and representation that resulted in the first apology from a sitting president. And last year, we at Lipscomb University named our Institute for Law, Justice, and Society after him. Please welcome Fred D. Gray.
Thank you.
Okay, that's Dave Wagner. Not the same resume. But let me introduce you to John. I'm sorry, Dave. Let me introduce you to John Lewis, and at some point he's going to show up again here, right? Well, that's our hope. One of the most courageous people in the civil rights movement, John Lewis, came here to Nashville, Tennessee, because he grew up in Troy, Alabama, son of sharecroppers. Wanted to desegregate Troy State University in Alabama, wrote to Martin Luther King Jr. telling him what he wanted to do. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Come to Montgomery and meet with me." This man, Fred Gray, meets Mr. Lewis at the bus station and takes him to see King, and they both say, "Go to Nashville." Mr. Lewis comes to Nashville. attends American Baptist College across the river from here, and is very quickly involved in Jim Lawson's trainings for nonviolent protests that begin the Nashville sit-in movements here in Nashville. From that point, he becomes one of the founders and leaders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Commission. He is the only surviving keynote speaker from the March on Washington. He is one of the freedom riders that rode throughout the South desegregating buses. And he is the best-selling author of, among other things, a wonderful graphic novel trilogy called March, that if you haven't bought yet, you should be ashamed of yourself, and you should go get that immediately. So, I don't know, let's wait till we know he can hear you. Can you hear us, Congressman? He cannot yet. So we will welcome him in a minute. Somebody's going to give me a high sign back there, right, when we've got him. The first question I have to ask, when we started talking about having this conversation and beginning the Fred D. Gray Institute for Law, Justice, and Society, we began talking about the kind of people we would like to bring to campus that would talk about Mr. Gray's legacy and can talk about the kind of work he has done his entire life. And the first person, Mr. Gray, that you mentioned is John Lewis. You said, please bring Congressman John Lewis to campus. Now, obviously, I have failed miserably. But why was it so important to you to have Mr. Lewis here?
First, Dr. Spivey, let me thank you very much for the invitation of appearing here. And I thank these students who are here. I thank my wife, Carol, who's here, my son, Fred Jr., and his wife, Bridget, and their daughter, Destiny, who is a pharmacy student here at the university. I want to thank all of you for coming out. When Dr. Spivey talked with me about a person to speak initially at the inauguration of the naming, of carrying out the terms and condition of the Memorandum of Understanding between me and Lipscomb, the first person I thought about who I would want to speak if I had a choice would be Congressman John Lewis. And let me tell you why. I met Congressman Lewis in 1958, a year or so after the Montgomery bus boycott ended. But Dr. King was still living in Montgomery. I received a phone call from him. He said, Fred, I received a letter from a young man down in Troy, Alabama, in Pike County. His name was John Lewis. And he wanted to attend Troy State, I think it was Troy State College at that time. And he wanted to come and talk with me about that. And Dr. King said to me, he said, Fred, if he comes and if he's interested, I think we would want you to file a lawsuit for him. So I, Dr. King says, sent a letter to John Lewis, sent him a round-trip bus ticket from Troy to Montgomery, and he said he had just received a phone call from John telling him that he was going to arrive at the bus station at a certain time. And he said, Fred, I want you to go down, meet him at the bus station. I will be at a meeting with Rab Abernathy at the First Baptist Church, and bring him to the meeting, and we'll talk with him. And if he wants to go to Troy, we'll see if we can't arrange for that to happen. Of course, I did what I had always done since Dr. King and I had worked for over 383 days during the Montgomery bus boycott, and I'd been involved in introducing him to the community to be the leader, a spokesman for the movement. I was happy to do that. I went, picked up John Lewis, took him to First Baptist Church where they were. So I introduced Congressman John Lewis, who was then just John Lewis, to Dr. Martin Luther King and to Ralph Abernathy in 1958. During the course of our conversation, he explained that he really wanted to go to college at home, and he was from Pike County. And I said, fine, and Dr. King said, well, we'll be happy to see that Fred represents you. We talked with him, but Dr. John Lewis was a minor, so he could not file the suit for himself. His parents lived in rural Pike County, and they were farmers, trying to make it. And when I talked with him about the fact that his parents would have to consent and they would have to file the lawsuit on his behalf, he said, well, I'll go back home and I'll talk to my parents. He did. He went, talked to his parents, but his parents felt, and while they expressed to their son John that they was very sorry, but they thought they would have to live there in Troy or in Pike County, in the community, with the white folks down there. And they felt that the pressure that would be brought upon them if they were to file a lawsuit against Troy State would be more than they felt they were able to take.
Let me stop you just for a second, because I think we've got the congressman
Good.
on the line now. So let's welcome John Lewis.
I'm honored to be here, but it's more technology. I remember so well, Fred took me to church, and I walked through the door. Reverend Nancy, Dr. Martin, I was so grateful that Fred Gray at the Greyhound drove me to. When I was growing up, I felt like all far away. It was a big city. It was only about 48 miles from Troy. And I remember Dr. King, are you John Lewis? And I said, Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis. Still call me the boy from Troy. That changed my life. I heard of Fred Gray because growing up there in rural Pike County, Alabama, my family was too poor to have a subscription to the local newspaper. But my grandfather had one, and he would pass his newspaper on to us when he would read it. And so I read about Fred Gray. I read about Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Abernathy and Rosa Parks. And these individuals inspired me to want to do something. And I've asked questions of my mother and my father and my grandparents, and they would say, boy, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But the action of Dr. King, Reverend Abernathy, Fred Gray, and Rosa Parks and others inspired me to find a way to get in the way and to get in trouble, what I call good trouble, necessary trouble, and I've been getting in trouble ever since. And I want to thank Fred Gray for all of your great and good work, for all that you've done. They have changed not just the state of Alabama, but they have changed our nation, and inspire people around the world to stand up and speak out and get in good trouble.
Congressman Lewis, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time. I know you've got a busy day, but one of the questions that having you two here together at the same time raises a lot of interesting questions for me. And one of those is the fact that you two approached bringing about change in very different ways. What have you appreciated about the way that Mr. Gray has approached his life's work? And Mr. Gray, I'm going to ask you the same question in a minute about the way Congressman Lewis has approached his work. But Congressman, let's start with you. What about the way Mr. Gray has approached his work have you appreciated?
I appreciate the hard work of Fred Gray. He's such an honorable human being and such a good human being. Through his work, through his consistent and persistent, we have witnessed what I like to call a nonviolent revolution under the rule of law. He has used the law as a means, as a tactic, to not only change America, but help inspire people around the world to stand up and to do it in a peaceful, orderly, nonviolent fashion. The use of law is in keeping with the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. Gandhi, this great advocate of the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, was a lawyer. Fred, through his belief in the law and his stick-to-itness to the way of the law, have inspired all of us to do what we can in a lawful, orderly, peaceful, non-violent fashion. Fred Gray used the law not just to change Montgomery and Alabama, but to motivate and inspire people around the South and around the world.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gray, I'm gonna kind of turn the question to you for a minute. You've had the advantage of having Mr. Lewis as a client several times. What about the way he has approached his work has inspired you?
Dr. Spivey, before I answer that, let me first thank the congressman. We know that a lot of things are going on in Washington and you couldn't be here. And just before you came on, he had asked me a question indicating why I had, when they were talking about getting a person to speak here on this occasion and others, why I suggested John Lewis. And I related to them the incident that you relate in your book and you relate in my book about your desire to go to Troy State, and I won't reiterate that, but I will say that if we had been successful and if your parents had agreed for you to be, and they be litigates in that case, Nashville may not have been the beneficiary of your work. It was only after you couldn't get the lawsuit filed at Troy that you came. And I certainly wanted you to be the person, and we're happy that you're able to join us. As a result, I am delighted, and I decided to become a lawyer on your question, Dr. Spivey, because I saw and I was told that lawyers render service. And when I returned from Nashville and went to Alabama to learn how to be a teacher, having learned something about being a preacher up here at the Nashville Christian Institute, a sister organization to Lipscomb, I ended up living on the west side of town. Alabama State's on the east side of town. I had to use the transportation system, and I found that our people were being mistreated. Even one person had been killed. And I concluded that what we needed to have, and everything in Montgomery and the South at that time was completely segregated. I made a commitment, and they told me that lawyers rendered service. So what I did was decided that I was going to finish Alabama State, go to somebody's law school, not even go to the University of Alabama or apply for it, finish law school, prepare myself for the Alabama bar as I went through law school, take the Alabama bar and destroy everything segregated I could find. What I wanted to do was to take the law and use the law and change the segregated laws that existed at the time so that all of our Americans would be able to enjoy that activity. So I use the legal aspect, the law aspect, and of course, Congressman Lewis and Dr. King and others ended up becoming activists doing other things that lawyers did not need to do, but we all made a good team, and I'm so happy he's able to join us here today.
Congressman Lewis, let me ask you this question. Can you talk a little for these students at this university about the role your faith has played in your work over the last 50 years?
But during the past 50 years or more, my faith has been my guide. When we were studying the way of peace, the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, we also studied the teachings of Jesus, not just the teaching of Gandhi, but also the teaching of Jesus. And we felt, I know I felt, that what I did and tried to do in a peaceful, orderly, nonviolent, and loving fashion was in keeping with the teaching of Jesus. When we were beaten, and I was beaten in Nashville and arrested there, my first arrest occurred there. On the Freedom Rise in 1961, been beaten and left bloody at the Greyhound bus station in Montgomery. And it was Fred Gray who defended us. During the march from Selma to Montgomery in '65, and the sit-ins and the Freedom Rides and the marches in other places, especially in the state of Alabama, it was Fred who had this great sense of faith, who instilled it in all of us. But if it hadn't been for my faith, I don't know what would have happened to me. I know when I was beaten and left bloody and unconscious on the bridge in Selma, I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. But I felt that somehow, in some way, through my faith, God Almighty would see me through. So during the 60s, I was arrested 40 times, and since I've been in Congress, another 5 times, and I'm probably going to get arrested again for something. Because my faith tells me that when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to say something, to do something, to speak up, and to speak out. And sometimes by saying something, or speaking up, or speaking out, you get in trouble. But your faith will see you through.
Mr. Gray, can you talk about the role your faith has played in the work you have done over the last 50 and 60 years?
My faith and my religious background played a pivotal role in everything that I have done. I was born during the Depression. My father died when I was 2. I was the youngest of 5 children. My mother was a domestic worker who instilled within us and who took us to the Holt Street Church of Christ at least once a week, and sometime a lot more than that. But she told us that we could be anything we wanted to be if we did 3 things. 1, to keep Christ first in your life. 2, stay in school and get a good education. And 3, stay out of trouble. don't get involved with this criminal justice system because it does not always work. So if I have been able to do anything in connection with the legal profession, or civil rights, of human rights, it has been initially because of the initial training I received religiously from my mother, the training I received at the Holt Street Church of Christ, and then I came to the Nashville Christian Institute here in Nashville, Tennessee in October of 1942, and traveled around with Brother Keeble as one of his boys, and I learned about Christianity and learned about Christian. So Christian education and the Lord's Word and my mother gave me the Christian background that has governed my life and whatever I've done since then.
Let me ask you this, as we shift gears a little bit to the past, to looking forward to a future. Mr. Gray, I'll start with you. What do you see in our country right now that concerns you, and what do you see that gives you hope?
Well, unfortunately, instead of our country being brought closer together, at least during the last year, we have been drifting apart. And I think that we need to try to go back to those basic principles that Jesus taught and the basic principles upon which this country was founded by people from around the world coming here, and this country giving them an opportunity to serve. And even during the middle of the segregated area, for those of us African Americans who were brought to the country against our will, and the only group that was brought that way, we were willing to work within the system and change the system, and to do it in a nonviolent manner, as Congressman Lewis has certainly demonstrated and has been probably arrested as much as any one person during that whole period of time. So I think today that we need to return to those basic principles, the religious activities and the life that Jesus led, and then our Constitution and the amendments thereto. We need to go back to try to enforce those provisions, including the amendments that gave rights not only to African Americans, but to other minorities, including women who were also discriminated against in voting and in service on juries and other areas.
Congressman Lewis, the same question to you. What do you see in the country right now that concerns you, and what do you see that gives you hope?
Well, I'm very concerned about the growing division in America today. There needs to be a greater effort to bring people together and not divide people on the basis of class, of race. When we were involved in the movement in Nashville and other parts of the South, we spoke of the beloved community, that we're one people, that we're one family, that we're one house, that we all live not just in the American house, but in the world house. And as Dr. King said on many, many occasions, we must learn to live together like brothers and sisters. If not, we will perish as fools. So it doesn't matter whether they're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. We're sisters and brothers. And we must do what we can to redeem the soul of America. I think the young people, our children, get it. And they would get us there. They would be the leaders of the 21st century.
Thank you, sir. One last question, and then I'm going to open up the floor. There are microphones right here if students want to ask questions. I've got one more question for each of these gentlemen, and then if you want to go ahead and be lining up to ask a question, go ahead and do that as quietly as you possibly can. Mr. Gray, we'll start with you. The civil rights movement was fueled by youth leaders and student activists. how would you describe the level of passion and dedication to social change that is required for today's youth and the challenges they face?
Well, I think those of us who were involved initially with the Montgomery bus boycott, and then those who were involved in the freedom rides and the freedom walks, and those involved in the marches for voter registration, like the Selma to Montgomery March, the formation of the Nonviolence Coordinating Committee. It was a committee of students. We did have a core of relatively young people with Dr. King. I was only 24, 25. Dr. King a couple of years older, and Abernathy a couple of years older than he. We simply saw problems and sought to solve those problems. I think today we have young people who have greater opportunities. They have electronic facilities that we didn't even dream about in those days. You have all of everything you need to have to help you solve the problems that are existing today. I think what you young people will have to do is don't expect those of us who were older and who now the sun is beginning to set and has set for many of us. But you're going to have to analyze the problems, discuss it with your colleagues, come up with some solutions. Don't expect somebody to point up the way and tell you how to solve these problems. Use your knowledge, use your technology, use your common sense, observe these problems, and then help to solve them. And I think two of the major problems still facing us are the problems we've had all along. They just come in different forms. Racism is still a problem. This country has never faced up to and sought to solve it in any consistent legislative constitutional manner. And secondly, the economic discrimination, the distinction and the division and the difference between the average income of the majority and the minority, the housing conditions, the living expenses. If you take all of those, minorities are at the bottom, majorities are on the top, and it's a part of economic discrimination. We need to destroy racism, we need to destroy economic discrimination, and that will help us toward helping to solve the problems which still confronts this nation.
Thank you, sir. And Congressman, to you, the same question. What advice do you have for this group about the challenges that they face?
I think it's important for young people and would-be leaders of the 21st century to study, read the literature, watch the videos, the films. I know there are people saying today nothing has changed, and I said to them, come and walk in my shoes. I will show you change. The signs that I saw when I was growing up in Alabama, when I came to Tennessee in 1957, that said white men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. Those signs are gone. And the only places you'll see those signs today would be in a book, in a museum, or on a video. But we have the invisible sign. And as Attorney Fred Gray stated so well, in spite of all of the progress, in spite of all of the changes, the scars and stains of racism are still deeply embedded in American society. And we have to do everything in our power to leave this little piece of real estate we call America a little better, a little greener, and a little cleaner for generation yet unborn. I think we take the long, hard look. We have a right to know what is in the food we eat, what is in the water we drink, and what is in the air we breathe. But organize, and I would encourage young people, men and women, Asian Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, all of us, to participate in the democratic process. The vote is one of the most powerful, nonviolent instrument or tool we have in a democratic society. Control everything we do from the time that we're born until the time we leave this planet. And we all must participate. We all can get out there and lead and do something.
Thank you, sir. Questions? Come on up to the mic. You can line up behind. You can line up behind Jessica. Go ahead, Jessica. Congressman, the question is about segregation that remains in churches, and whether or not that are old vestiges of Jim Crow, and if you have ideas of how we begin to break down the segregation in our places of worship.
Well, and I think Dr. King and other ministers, religious leaders, the old theologian used to say that 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning in America is the most segregated hour of the day. We have to tear down all barriers that divide people, that separate people. If we believe that we are brothers and sisters, that we're one people, we're one family, and that we all serve the same God, then we got to break down and end the barriers of discrimination in our church and religion.
And Mr. Gray, you desegregated a church. How would you answer Jessica's question?
Because in Tuskegee, during the middle of the Civil Rights Movement, we had a small Tuskegee Institute Church of Christ on the western part of the city. We had a small East End Church of Christ, which was white, on the eastern end of the city. We had a banker who was white and a member of the church, Alan Parker, of the church there. At that time, in addition to my civil rights work, I was also preaching for the church that was in Tuskegee at one point. And while I was doing legal work for the bank and legal work for the people in the community, and Brother Parker and I were members of the same Church of Christ, but yet on Sundays we went to different places. We concluded, he did on behalf of the then white church, and I did with others on the part of the black church, that it just made sense. It was a handful of blacks and a handful of whites, and put them together, you still wouldn't have a good handful. Then all, we decided we'd do it. We came up with a plan, and we ended up having one worship service together and another one, and we decided that we had more in common than we had against each other, and we were able to merge those two churches of Christ without losing any of the members at that time. And I think it altogether depends upon the hearts and minds of individuals. And as Christians, we shouldn't have to be compelled to do anything. I concluded a long time ago that I wasn't going to use my legal skills in filing lawsuits against churches to try to get them to desegregate. I wasn't going to do that. Because if they didn't understand enough about the religion of Jesus to know that that shouldn't be done, then it means my saying it wouldn't help, and they wouldn't go to heaven anyway.
Man, I like that. Okay. Sorry, we'll go Leslie and then here. Go ahead, Leslie.
Hi, I just wanted to know your guys' thoughts on the repeal of DACA and how optimistic are you on whether or not the DREAM Act will pass?
So the question is about DACA and the repeal of DACA. I'm going to start with Mr. Gray because I think your answer will be shorter than the congressman's about DACA. But what do you think about the appeal of the DACA legislation for undocumented students and the repeal of those protections for DACA students?
Repeal
of the protections for undocumented immigrant students.
Oh, I think this whole, the whole immigration policy as adopted now by this administration is just wrong. We're supposed to be a open nation. We had people from around the world who made this country what it is. And it just doesn't make sense to have the type policy we have. And I know the congressman knows about all the technical aspects of it.
Congressman, the question again is, what do you think about the repeal of the DACA protections for students?
Well, it doesn't make sense. It is not in keeping what this country is all about. My very last arrest, October a year ago, was trying to get the Speaker of the House to bring forth a comprehensive immigration reform bill. If he had brought the bill forth, every single member, maybe except one or two on our side, would have voted for it. And enough Republicans would have voted. We would have passed it. We would have sent it to President Obama. He would have signed it into law. I think it's sinful. It is a disgrace to have hundreds and thousands of young people. Many of these young people came here when they was 3 and 4 or 5 years old, and maybe some was younger. This is the only country they know anything about. We need to set them free, set them on a path to citizenship. That is the right thing to do. When the Pope came and spoke to a joint session of the Congress last year, he said, in effect, we are all immigrants. We all come from some other place. It is wrong. This administration is going backward, and we need to go forward.
Thank you, sir.
My question is about the nonviolent methods of protest that you used, and your opinion on those that he used as well. Some people used nonviolence as a purely strategic move, and some out of like a moral obligation or a religious standpoint. Where would you fall on that spectrum?
Congressman, the question is about the nonviolent methods of protest and whether you used it as a strategic move or as a moral or spiritual obligation.
I use the philosophy of nonviolence as a spiritual force, as a moral obligation. If you believe in that there's a spark of divine in every human being, there is a spark of the divinity in every human being, then we don't have a right to abuse that spirit. We don't have a right to destroy that sense of humanity. So we don't go around beating people, not respecting people. We respect everybody. In all of my arrests and jailings and beating and people hitting me, I never had the desire to strike back. I think it is the way. When we were arrested in Nashville on February 27th, 1960, 89 students from the different colleges and universities were arrested during the sit-in. Every single one of us had a copy of the do's and don'ts on us. And one of the last lines in the do's and don'ts says something like, remember the teaching of Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and Jesus. God bless you. And we all went to jail with copies of those do's and don'ts. It was not just a civil movement, but it was a religious movement. We came under the influence of a young Methodist minister by the name of Jim Lawson, who taught us the way of peace, the way of love, within keeping with the teaching of Jesus, not just the teaching of Gandhi.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gray, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? No? All right. Mason?
I have obviously had very different experiences from the two of you, and I know growing up, I was taught in school and in church that segregation was kind of like not a thing anymore because I was mostly around white teachers and white students, and I think that we've kind of tried to write that out of our history because we're ashamed of it, but then I kind of began to grow up and see that it's still very prevalent. Do you think that like in the past year or a few years that it's like it got better and then has gotten worse, or has it just always like been a fight? Do you think it's worse now than it has been in the recent past? If that makes any sense.
Congressman, the question, as I understand it, and you did a great job, but it was a little long. The question, as I understand it, as many of us have grown up not feeling the effects of segregation out of privilege or geography or for whatever reason. Do you feel like in the last year it has gotten worse, or are more of us just aware of it now?
Well, I tell you what I witnessed from a distance going on in Virginia. I thought before Virginia, I thought we've come much farther, that we have made more progress. But when I saw that display of hate, it made me cry. It's not the America that I want to live in. That was taking us back. And we cannot go back, we have to go forward. There are forces in America today trying to take us back. But we've come too far, we made too much progress, and all of us, and especially young people, and people of faith must say that we're not going back, we're going forward to create one America.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gray.
I think the last year, beginning particularly with the result of the election in November, you had, and there was a real feeling that the nation, I think, knew both of the candidates who were running. And I think they knew something about the businessman, something about the politician. But I really think it's one thing to campaign, but once you end up getting elected, you then don't just represent the people who happen to have voted for you, but it's like it was with me when I ran for the legislature in Alabama in 1970 and became one of the first two blacks to run in the Alabama legislature. The first person who came in my office the next day after the election was a white man from Bullitt County, south of Tuskegee, who operated a business and lived in Bullitt County, but owned property in Macon County. He came to me and said, "Lawyer, I want to congratulate you on winning." He said, "I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't vote for you, but you have been elected, you are my representative, and I want you to know, if you ever need someone to do something in Bullock County and I can be of some assistance to you, let me know. And I told him, fine. And I said, as a matter of fact, there is something. And this relates too to Nashville, so I have a lot of connections here. I told him, I said, Dr. Henry Foster, who later became a high official at Meharry College here, had an infant maternity program there for these pregnant women who didn't have money to go to see a doctor. He had the program in Tuskegee, and they were getting blacks from all the counties around who needed the care, and it didn't cost them anything. Dr. Foster wanted that in Bullock County. He couldn't get it because the doctors there wouldn't. I told him, I said, now, the people who will use this program won't go to the doctor because they don't have the money to pay, and I think you can help me. He says, get me together some information and I'll see what I could do. I talked to Dr. Foster, he got the material, I got the material to the man, and in less than 3 months, that program was going. So I think what our politicians are going to need to learn, whether they're Democrats or whether they're Republicans, once they are elected, they represent all the people. And you're going to have to follow the Constitution as it is written and not what may be your personal feelings. I think what has happened in the last year, there has been more enforcing of what persons have promised politically or what their personal feeling is rather than what the needs of this country is all about. And we need to come back to try to satisfy the needs of the country and the people in it.
Thank you, sir. Last one.
Hi, my name's Noah, and so you guys have had extreme success in both of your careers, but what I want to know is what were your biggest failures, and how did you overcome them, I guess?
Congressman, I'm going to let Mr. Gray answer this question first, but the question is, what was your biggest failure and how did you overcome it? Mr. Gray.
That's a good question. I would think if I had a failure, and I've had some failures, and I don't know whether I like the failure or not, but if there was one thing, I like to phrase it this way, that I would try to do a little different than I did as I came along. It would be, I would try to spend a little more time with my children as they were growing up. Now, when they were growing up, they were born right in the middle of all of these activities. And I had a lovely wife for some 40 years who really took care of them. But I didn't devote as much time as dealing with them as I look back, I thought I would have. But a good wife and a good neighbor who lived right behind us, who worked with children, helped the boys, and would take them to places that I didn't have a chance or didn't. I thought my work was of such that I didn't. But if I could change something, I would try to devote a little more time to them.
Congressman, your biggest failure and how did you overcome it?
Well, when I look back, I regret that I didn't spend more time with individuals like Fred Gray and Martin Luther King Jr., learning from them. We were all too busy in the moment of the movement. On the other hand, I feel more than lucky. I feel blessed that I came in contact with Fred Gray, learned so much from him and so much from Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to give you both a chance for a last word to these students. Mr. Gray, you first, and then we'll end with Congressman Lewis.
Let me simply conclude by saying that as I look back over some 63 years as a lawyer and over some about 72 years as a minister, I had hope, and particularly in the civil rights field, that the white power structure in Alabama, and I say Alabama because I'm not one of these national lawyers. I became a lawyer to become a lawyer in Alabama to solve the problems there. And I felt if we could solve problems in Alabama, there are other lawyers in these other states who would be able to do the same thing. I really thought that when white people would see that African Americans and other minorities could, if given an opportunity, perform equally as well or better in some instances than they, that they would have a real change of heart. But I was grossly mistaken. As I look back now and see so many of the persons, and particularly those in powerful political positions, their hearts have not been changed. Their actions to some degree have been changed, but only to the extent that the court has directed it. But our real problem is to try to change the minds and hearts of individuals so that they will be able to live in the language, not just of our Constitution, but what Jesus taught his disciples. And they taught it long before we had a Constitution, and that is that we are all God's children, and we should all be treated alike regardless.
Congressman Lewis, a last word.
Let me just close by saying, as young people, as leaders of the 21st century, you must never, ever give up. Never become bitter. Never become hostile. As Dr. King would say, never hate, for hate is too heavy a burden to bear. The way of love is a much better way. And know within yourself that you too can do something. You too can help change not only America, but help change the world. During my early years, we hadn't heard of the internet. We didn't know anything about Facebook. But we used what we had to help bring about a nonviolent revolution of values, a revolution of ideas. So I said to you, go in peace and do good, do well.
Congressman, I want you to see me as I say this because we're going to close. I'm going to turn the back on all these people for a minute. I want you to see me as we say this. Yesterday in the Christian calendar, we began Advent, a season that at its heart is about God putting a body in the path of injustice. Everyone in this room has benefited from you and Mr. Gray putting your bodies in front of injustice. And we are immensely grateful and thankful for both of you. Thank you very, very much for being with us.